All right, let's get started. Today we are going to be painting a picture of a fall tree. You should have a printout, which you should have been able to print out from my Facebook page. You should also have some transfer paper. Today I'm using white transfer paper instead of my usual gray or black transfer paper. You will be able to tell the side that you will want to transfer because it'll be slightly off-white, and then there will be a bright white side. The off-white side is the side you're going to want to have facing your canvas when it's transferring time. I also have some acrylic paints. I have some painter's tape. I have a bunch of brushes, some water, a palette, and something to clean my brushes on. So for this painting, I'm going to be starting out by painting in my background first and then transferring my image on. So I'm going to start with one of my biggest brushes. This one is a 3/4 inch brush. Make sure that the bristles are nice and soft. And then I'm going to get my blue acrylic paint. I'm going to shake it up so that the paint and water in there are all mixed up. Otherwise you might try to squirt it out and it'll be mostly water. And I'm just going to put a dime size glob of paint on my palette. I like to start out with a little bit of paint and I can always add more. I'm going to get my brush just a little bit wet. Dry it off just a little bit. And get my brush covered in blue paint, and I am going to be working from my top left corner down to the other side of my painting, and I'm going to do crisscrosses like this. And my canvas is a wraparound canvas, so I'm also going to paint the edges of my canvas so that I don't need to get a frame for this painting. Some canvases don't wrap around all the way, they'll have staples along the edge, or you might have a canvas board, which is canvas wrapped around either a piece of wood or a piece of acid-free cardboard. And those will work for this painting too, you just won't paint the sides. And I'm doing kind of a crisscross X motion to paint in my background so that it has a little texture to it. We're going to get that side. There we go. Just keep crisscrossing like this. And then I'm going to have the bottom part of my canvas be a little darker than the top, so I'm going to paint in the bottom of my canvas real quick, just pure blue, and I'm going to add some more colors later. And then just do little crisscrosses over the edge so it blends in with the front of my canvas. Being careful not to put my hands in the wet paint on the edge. I'm going to lay that back down on my table. Oh, looks like I need some more blue paint. Being careful not to put my hand on the canvas so that it won't get paint on it. I might hold it up in the corner that doesn't have any paint yet. I'm just going to keep painting in the bottom, so there's kind of like a square of white right here. I'll get a little bit of the side canvas. Might get a little bit of paint on my fingers, and that's okay. You're going to get a little messy when you paint. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my brush wet and take almost all of the blue off of my brush. Then I'm going to go back in and crisscross again and make it just a little bit of a light blue by having it be very transparent with a lot of water in it. And blend that into the white of my canvas over here. And just touching the very corners of my canvas so I don't smudge any paint. I'm going to go ahead and just really watery blue and do that along the edges so it wraps around my canvas, crisscross it in. Maybe put a little bit more solid blue there. Got a little bit of paint on my thumb, but that'll be okay. Maybe add a little bit more of the plain blue to blend in there. Key is you just want it to be lighter right here than it is all along the rest of this area. I'm going to fill in a bit more blue here. And clean out my brush. I'm going to get another color now. I'm going to get some purple. I'm going to shake that up. Put that on my palette next to the blue. Remember, a little bit of paint goes a long way. You can always get more out. You can't put it back in the tube. I'm just going to add a little bit of purple to this lower left corner of my painting. Like that. I won't go all the way over to this corner, maybe just barely touch the top corner. I'm going to tilt the canvas up a bit and add the purple to the edge. Again, painting the edge is optional. You can decide to leave it plain white because you're going to frame it later. And then with the purple still on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and dip it back into that blue. I'm just going to blend it in a little bit so it's not such a strong purple on top. And I can do as many layers of purple and blue until I get the exact color I want. And there we go. That is my background for this painting. I think that'll turn out really nicely. I'm going to clean out my brush so the paint doesn't dry on it. And now you have two choices. You can either leave your painting to dry, or you can use a blow dryer to speed up the process. Now you'll know your paint is dry when you can touch it, and not only will nothing come up on your hand, but it will also feel kind of warm. If it feels cooler than like the canvas did before you put paint on it, that means that the layers underneath the top are still wet, and if you put any more paint on top of that, it's going to mix with the paint colors and not end up the way you want it to. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and use a blow dryer to dry this off a little quicker. That's centered. And I am going to be holding it about 3 or 4 inches away from my painting so that it doesn't get too close. You don't want to like touch it with the blow dryer or you'll end up burning your canvas. So give it a little bit of space, and it'll take a few passes with the blow dryer before it's dry. All right, my background is now dry, so I am going to start transferring my image onto my canvas. So I have my white transfer paper here, and I'm going to flip it so that the cream side is facing down, and I'm going to take my transfer image and put that on top. And you'll see there are some lines along the edge of the transfer image. You want to get those as close to the edges as you can. It might be a little bigger, like mine's a little bigger here. Just want to make sure it's mostly lined up to keep that right where I want it to be. Then I'm going to take some tape. I'm using green painter's tape, but if you use masking tape, that'll work as well. I wouldn't use Scotch tape. That's not the best one to use. And I'm going to put the tape on the transfer picture and wrap it around and attach it to the back of my canvas. That way I can lift it up and make sure that everything is transferring correctly. So I'm going to put this down, make sure it's lined up. I'm going to get my pencil. Let's see. And I'm using a drafting pencil, but any pencil will work, or even a pen. You can even just use like a pointy stick and it would work because you're just putting pressure on the paper and that's going to transfer it onto your background. So I'm just going to go over these lines. pushing pretty firmly. And then you can see when I lift it up, there will be a little faint white line that shows up where I pushed on the transfer paper. You can always go over it again if it's not quite as dark as you wanted it to be, or as easy to see the white line. It's right there. You can barely see it, but it's there. Okay. Alright, I've been going over with my white transfer paper and it's just not showing up quite as well as I wanted it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of my black transfer paper and use that instead. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. Get some of my really dark black transfer paper. It has a light gray side and it has a darker black side. You can see I've used this before. I'm just going to put the darker black side facing my image. You can also get it, let's see if I have a piece that comes with a white side and a gray side. You want to put the gray side down if it comes with a white side and a gray side. Let's go ahead and put this on top. Line it up again. I just wanted to make sure that you guys could see this. So it'll still work with the white transfer paper, but I want to make sure you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit better, so I'm going to do it with dark black. The same thing, going to trace over those lines. There, I can see it a little bit better. It's a little harder to see on the video, but it would show up a little better with black, I think, with this one. I was thinking that the dark blue would be a little bit too dark to see the black on, but I think it will work just fine. Alright, so I just finished going over all of those lines, so I'm going to peel my transfer paper and my template off. And you can really see it well where it's a little lighter right here. The branch is showing up. I can see the black lines down here, but it's probably not showing up on the camera because of the contrast on the camera. What we're going to be doing now is just painting in our tree, just like a coloring book. So I'm going to start with just some plain brown. And this is kind of a milk chocolate brown. It actually is named milk chocolate. And I'm going to shake this up. You could use a darker brown. Your tree will just be a little darker, or you could use a lighter brown. I'm going to get a little bit of paint there. And then I'm going to use a round brush. Let's see, this is my number 7 round brush, but anything that's about the width of the tip of a pencil should be just fine when it's rolled together, so it's kind of like that. I just say anything smaller than a 1/4 inch round would be fine. I'm going to get it wet, and I'm going to put that in the paint, and then to get a fine tip, I'm just going to roll my brush on the palette, and that way I can fit in all the little nooks and crannies of this tree. And I'm going to start from the left side of my tree and go towards the right because I'm right-handed. If you are left-handed, you'll want to go from the right side of your tree to the left. That way you won't accidentally stick your hand in some wet paint and then rest it on your canvas and put blotches of brown paint everywhere. I'm just going to paint this in like a coloring book. And remembering to get the little tiny branches. I might pull up my picture that I transferred from and reference it every once in a while to say, oh yeah, there's a little branch there that I couldn't see very well, so I'll make sure it's there. And if you have a few extra branches that show up in your tree, or you end up deciding to not do every single tiny little branch and it just fades into the background, that is fine, because every tree is different, so your tree will be a little different from mine, and that's all right. Just a nice base coat. Every once in a while get your brush wet again and dry it off a little bit. If your brush gets a little too dry, the paint won't get into all the little nooks and crannies of your canvas. I'm going to wrap this around the edge of the canvas again. But if you get it a little bit too wet, it will get transparent. Then you would want to add more paint to your brush so it doesn't get see-through. You might do a few layers of brown to get it as dark as you want it to be and not have any of the purple and blue showing through. And that's just fine. There we go. There we are. And let's see, I have a branch coming up here. And you can see in my picture I don't have any branches here, but maybe I want to add another branch. So I just come in with a bit of paint. You can add as many branches as you want, or leave a few out, just like I said before. Just going to paint it in. Sometimes I like to start at the narrow tip of my branch by getting a nice fine tip by rolling my paintbrush on the palette. And then I'll go into the very tip of a branch, pushing lightly, and then I'll push a little bit more to make it thicker as it goes in towards the trunk of the tree, because your branches are always going to be thinner further away from the trunk and thicker closer to the trunk. The further away from the trunk they get, the thinner they get. And you don't need to follow your template exactly. We're going to be covering up a lot of these branches with our leaves. And that going from the outside to the inside isn't a hard, fast rule. You'll notice with that branch I went from the trunk out. So just paint however you feel comfortable. And if I end up going too fast for you, you can pause the video, catch up. There we go. You just have to be nice and patient and work on filling in all of these little branches. Maybe your transfer wasn't super perfect, so you can't see every tiny little detail, and that's fine. They're basically just guidelines anyway. And there we go. From the edge of this one in. Some of these branches that were just little lines, I might make a little thicker. I might leave them as thin as I can. It's whatever looks best to you. It's not going to look exactly like the transfer. And it'll give it a nice hand-done look. More water on my brush. Almost there. That one was a little bit more transparent than I want it to be, so I'm going to go over it a few times so I don't see the transfer marks as much. But we're also going to be going over with a few other layers of paint to give it a more textured, like bark look. This is just our base coat. A little more water. Roll my brush so it's got a nice fine point, and you can always use more than one size of brush. I'm just being lazy and using one. You can use a couple different narrow brushes and a couple thicker brushes, whatever you feel comfortable with. Looks like I forgot to put a few of my branches in there. If you look at my transfer template, there's a branch here that I didn't put in. I'll just remember to add that in. A little more water on my brush. Fill that in a little more over there on the trunk. Just a few more branches left. Remembering to push more where I want it to be thicker, and to be give it a very light touch where I want it to be thinner. A little more water on my brush. Seeing a little bit more of the canvas texture than I want to. When there's more water, it will fall into the little nooks and crannies of your canvas a bit more, but it will also be more transparent. So you'll play with how much water you want to put on there. Okay, I think that's a pretty good base coat. I'll clean out my brush. And I'm going to get a slightly narrower brush for this next part. Let's see, it looks like the one that I got is a number 6. It's just the size down. I'm going to get a little bit of yellow. Put that on my palette. Just a tiny bit. And a little bit of white. Put that right next to the yellow. And I'm going to make a kind of warm pale yellow white color. Like almost white, but just slightly pale yellow, I think. So about 50-50, maybe just a tiny bit more white than 50-50 yellow and white. And I'm going to roll my brush. I'm going to make a little bit more of it. It's harder to make a color again after you've used it up. So I'm going to make a fair amount. It's a nice pale yellow. Roll my brush so I get a nice fine tip. And then since I have this lighter part on my canvas here, I'm going to act like that's my light source. And I'm going to be adding some highlights along the top of my branches, like this, and little stripey motions to give it a bark texture. And I'm also going to keep these highlights slightly more towards the right side of the painting. And it's going to mix a little bit with the brown that's underneath it, and that's what we want it to do. It'll blend these highlights in. Just like that. Just give our tree a little bit more depth. So it looks like it's kind of got a little bit of a sun rays hitting it every once in a while. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're going to be covering up a good number of these branches with those leaves we're going to put in later. And notice I'm going to have this branch be on top, so I'm not painting the highlights over it. And I'd actually put some highlights along the right side of this branch to show that it's on top, like that. You can decide to have that branch underneath if you want, and you would just go straight across and then not have the highlight cross over that branch. Got a little bit too much water on my brush, so I'll dry that off. Just keep filling in little highlights. I'll be doing more on these branches on this side. Do some little kind of stripies down the right side of the trunk. Maybe a little on this big branch too. on these bigger branches, like the sun peeked through a little bit there. And then there, that's pretty good for my highlights. I'll clean off my brush. And then I'm going to get some black. Shake that up. That right there on my palette, just a tiny little bit. A little bit of black will go a long way. I'm going to dip my brush in the paint, roll it so that it's nice and narrow on the tip. And then I'm just going to do the opposite. I'm going to do some black stripies on the left side and along the bottom of my branches. So like that. Try to hold my hand a different way so you can see it a little bit better. And don't worry if they end up a little bit too dark. You can always come in with a little bit of black. I'm planning on doing that myself. Well, not black, brown, sorry, I'm saying the wrong color here. You can always make it a little bit more watery, so it's more transparent. I'm not going to do too many shadows because I want this tree to be fairly bright looking. And you'll see it got a little messy up here. That's fine because I'm going to be covering that area up with my leaves. I just want that texture to show a little bit through with the leaves. I'd probably just do like that far in, about halfway through the tree, right up against the trunk there. The middle, maybe a few more little black stripes. Tone a few of those down with a little bit of brown. Oh, I got a drippy on my painting. I'm going to go ahead and dab those up. And you'll notice it'll probably smudge some of my paint. I'll just paint over those again. If you make a little mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can always wait for it to dry and paint over it. Just add a little bit of brown to tone down some of those black areas. Not too much. There we go. I think that's pretty good. Go ahead and put this brush away after cleaning it out. And now I'm going to start doing the leaves, and this is the fun part. I'm going to start with some red. Shake that up. Put that on the palette fairly close to the yellow, I think. A little bit more because I know I'm going to use a bunch of red. And I got some paint on my hand. I'm just going to clean that off real quick with some paper towel I have over here on the side. All right. Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not dripping any paint on this. And then I'm going to get a brush. Let's see, I'll use my 1/2 inch brush, I think. And I'm going to get that wet. It's a 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm going to get a lot of paint on that. I don't want to have too much water on this because I want it to be nice and opaque. And starting from the left side going towards the right, I'm going to just do little dabs like this. And since I'm wrapping my picture around my canvas, I'm also going to do that on the sides. There we go, just like that. And the top, just to where that branch goes. Maybe a little bit more. I'm just going to keep doing little dabs, kind of following the contours of my branches. I'm going to continue to get more red. I need a little bit more water too. Keep loading your brush up with paint. And I'm going to have a bunch of leaves kind of like falling off the tree like this, like they're getting blown off in the wind. I don't want to put a lot of red leaves. I'm going to add highlights with orange and yellow next. There. It's looking pretty good to me. Add a few more red leaves down here. All right, I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm going to go ahead and get some orange paint now. And I'm not going to wait for that red to dry. I want to get in that red paint while it's still wet with this orange. I'm going to start with that same going on the side and along the top of my canvas since I'm wrapping my picture around. A little bit more on the top than on the side because, again, I'm having my highlights show up more on this side because that's where my light source is. And it's going to blend in with the red a little bit. That's what you want it to do. Do just a little bit of orange along the left side, a lot more orange towards the right. Kind of go over some of these, maybe add a few just plain orange leaves falling off the tree. And towards the bottom I won't add as much orange. There we go. I'm going to clean out my brush. And you can add more orange or more red. It's your tree. You can decide whether it's going to be more orange, red, or yellow. Now I'm going to add the yellow. I'm not going to add any yellow to this side that wraps around that side. I'll add a few tiny bits of just pure yellow along the top. It's pretty much just going to turn into a lighter orange with the way it's going to mix, and that's what I'm looking for. If you want your yellow to be more vibrant, you would wait for the orange to dry, but I want to have it kind of blend in and have my tree be a little more orangey. Clean out my brush. It got just a little too orangey on my brush. Sticking mostly to the top and right side of my tree. Just a few very little highlights over here. All right, a few here, a little bit here, and just a few more little yellow highlights here. Excellent. I think that turned out just the way I wanted it to. So there you go. You have a nice fall tree with the leaves blowing off in the wind. I hope you guys had fun painting this with me. If you want to do some other painting projects or other arts and crafts projects, check out my YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. You can also check out my Etsy shop or my Facebook page. And I hope you had fun. I'll see you later for more paintings, hopefully. Bye.